Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and I have recently reread and read a few essays and secondary sources on Mark Danielewski's debut novel, House of Leaves. And let me just say this, there's lots to be said, lots of good things to be said about Danielewski's later production, about the Familiar series, about the other stuff he wrote, but House of Leaves, if you ask me, is on an entirely different level. Danielewski is a great writer in general, he's one of those quirky writers who throws at you all kinds of interesting ideas in his books, but House of Leaves, besides all the fluff, leaving aside, you know, the weird formatting and the way the text is presented and the different colors and the appendixes and such, had it been a standard like novel written like all other novels in history, it still would have been a masterpiece. And there are some amazing passages in here, and I am more and more convinced it's an amazing horror novel, and it's still one of the scariest books I've ever read. So today I'm filming one of my famous reader's guides, which is no guide at all actually. This is not the kind of video you should watch if you plan to read the book or if you are currently reading it. It's more a video that you should watch if you finished reading House of Leaves and you liked it and you're curious about what other people have to say about it, what other people discovered in the novel. And I'm going to recommend a few essays and secondary sources that helped me understand the novel better through links in the description box, and I'd like to discuss with you guys a few elements of the book, a few of the most cryptic elements of the book, and hear what you thought about them. So really the title of the video should have been something like, you know, House of Leaves, words about it, and discussion points that I would be interested to talk about with other people, but that's not very sexy, and you have to be a little bit slutty when you have a YouTube channel and such. The three elements of the book I'd like to discuss with you guys are the house on Ash Tree Lane as a representation of hell, and the whole discussion of hell that goes on throughout the book, the figure of the Minotaur, and the labyrinth, the idea of the labyrinth in the book and how you approached it. Let's start with the idea of hell in the book. One of the key tropes and ideas in Western literature, you find it time and again, is that to overcome your demons and your fears and your traumas, you have to descend into some kind of hell. And of course the key text in this sense is the Divine Comedy by Dante, and the Inferno in the Divine Comedy, which is a literal descent into hell. What you have in the Inferno is this guy, he is a middle-aged guy, the love of his life has died, he never told her he loved her, and he's basically depressed, and he is facing a traumatic situation, and in order to overcome all this, he has to pass through hell and to see the consequences of sin and what his despair might lead to if he is not able to overcome it. And he does so guided by the spirit of this woman he loved, which is basically his muse, and by literature, by the literature he loved, by the figure of Virgil. In House of Leaves you have a similar kind of descent into the house. All of the main characters in the two narratives you find in House of Leaves, which are the Navidson Record, the story of these people exploring this weird house, and Torrance's narrative, the story of this guy who comes into possession of this weird text, the Navidson Record, this story, and has to make sense of it and becomes like the curator of this text. Both of these worlds are people by guys that have lived traumatic experiences. And the weird thing is that, you know, facing the house, both directly as explorers and in the form of the text, actually makes their traumas so much worse and makes them live these traumas time and again. In a way, we are back to that classical trope that in order to overcome your fears and your demons, you have to go through hell. But in another meaningful way, it's doubtful in House of Leaves whether facing your traumas actually leads to a form of healing. Because, you know, people actually die while exploring this mysterious house. And Johnny Truant too, becomes the victim of terrible terrors and goes even very close to suicide. One of the ideas that emerges in House of Leaves is the importance of connectedness, which is a key theme in much contemporary American literature. Meaningfully enough, all of these characters have to, in order to overcome their fears, have to confront them again and to face their traumas. Again, this is something that comes also from the theories of psychoanalysis, so that, for instance, Johnny Truant his mother almost killed him, almost choked him when he was a kid, and he's constantly faced by this demon who has very long fingers. Like Karen, she suffers from claustrophobia and eventually has to explore the very claustrophobic and fucked up holes of the house, but at the same time that is almost not enough. And there's a need, in order to overcome these fears, for the characters to connect with other characters. So that, for instance, Navidson himself is eventually saved only when his wife comes to save him, overcomes her own trauma, her claustrophobia, and comes to save him from the house. She becomes effectively his own Beatrice. And Truant too, Johnny Truant too, in a very important passage toward the end of the book, or at least of his part of the narrative in the book, it is revealed that one of the things that helps him overcome his traumatic experience with the Navidson record, with this text, is finding out how other people have approached the text, have read the stuff he has edited and curated, and how these people are positively influenced by this text. Yeah, they are freaked out, yeah, they think it is some kind of supernatural thingy phenomenon, but at the same time their lives are enriched by what he has created. This is of course all open to interpretation, because connectedness is all sweet, but other characters besides these ones are not so lucky within the house. And Connor Dawson, for instance, who wrote a very brilliant essay on the metaphor of hell in House of Leaves, does not believe that any kind of redemption of healing is possible in the novel. And in fact, the novel's ending describes a kind of bitter happy ending and casts a doubt whether what you're reading is actually can possibly be considered a happy ending, considering all the traumas the characters had to live through. But what do you think? Did you perceive House of Leaves and the fate of its characters as a form of happy ending? Did you see them as people who had overcome their traumas thanks to the experience? Did you believe they barely even survived the book and that they were worse off at the end than they were at the beginning? I believe, and mine is kind of a pussy answer, but I believe that in a book such as House of Leaves, which is so interactive and puts so much importance on the reader, your kind of reader experience also determines in a way the outcome for the characters. So that if you read the book as a traumatic experience that ruined 2 weeks of your life, it's unlikely that you'll perceive it as extremely positive, but that's a discussion for another day. What did you think? Another curious element, very curious element, probably my favorite thing about House of Leaves, I am kind of a monster buff, is the figure of the Minotaur. What the fuck is that thing? Is it real? Does it exist? Is it just a figment of people's imagination? Of course, what you find time and again in essays and papers is that it is a representation of the character psyche, which is the boring explanation for the Minotaur. And this tendency to dismiss the Minotaur goes hand in hand with a tendency in papers to dismiss House of Leaves as a horror novel, and you'll find time and again people claiming that it is actually a literary fiction work or an experimental piece of fiction that is just disguised as a haunted house narrative, as if haunted house narratives couldn't talk about, the kind of stuff House of Leaves discuss, solipsism, isolation and trauma. And that's fucked up, because let's face it, House of Leaves is a horror novel. I think it's kinda silly to, deny that. But again, going back to the Minotaur, is it a figment of people's imagination? It's difficult to say, because it's true that so many genre elements in the novel appear to be, closely related to the character's psyche. So that, for instance, the very labyrinth at the heart of the house kinda disappears once Navidson and Karen overcome their doubts and their own fears and want to be reunited together. They find each other in the labyrinth, so that, love was inside them all the time. And that's nice, very nice, and a good ending to the book, but also kinda bogus on a certain level. But the Minotaur is somewhat different. It kills people in the house, and if you consider the frame narrative, Johnny Truant's story, something killed Zampano, and it's kinda clear that it was something because of, all the nail marks close to the corpse. And, what the fuck was that? I doubted it was a figment of anybody's imagination, but of course it's a complicated and complex topic, and everyone has a take, and what is again yours? How did you perceive the Minotaur? A very interesting very interesting explanation comes from a scholar called Hayles. Her name is Katherine Hayles. Her name is Katherine Hayles. Her name is Katherine, which points at how at a passage where Zampano warns the reader not to go, if they ever pass by Ash Tree Lane, not to visit the motherfucking house, because there is nothing there, beware. And she reads this passage not as if Zampano is just saying there's nothing there, just go on, but if he is as if he's saying there is nothing there. In this sense, the Minotaur, which is of course its name is constantly under erasure, becomes a representation of nothingness, of absence, which is a very cool idea, both because of the fact that you never see it, and that's fine, and goes hand in hand with this explanation, because of the whole Lovecraftian dimension of the thing, as the Minotaur is something that you cannot possibly comprehend, like the absence of reason or understanding or whatever, and because it links House of Leaves to quite a few other contemporary narratives, most notably The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Díaz, in which the main enemy, the main antagonist, is a figure of an embodiment of absence, of erasure. In that case, it's the faceless man. But that's a matter for a different paper, and you can't write it because I'll cut you if you do that. I'll write it someday, I guess. The final thing I want to discuss in this sprawling and confused video is the idea of the labyrinth in the novel. And many scholars have discussed how the labyrinth ties House of Leaves, this idea of the labyrinth, the house as a labyrinth, ties the novel to the works of J.L. Borges, who is like this Argentinian writer who peopled his works with so many labyrinths, and who is kind of the inspiration for Zampano, if he is not Zampano in the first place. And the book itself, I don't need to tell you, is a labyrinth of sorts, and the fact that some pages are almost entirely white and some pages are filled with text is supposed to mirror that kind of experience, the experience of the feeling of disorientation you feel inside a labyrinth, the idea that at times you go very fast because you have a long narrow corridor, at times you go very slow because you're kind of lost. And that is one of the most brilliant things about the book. I said at the beginning of this video that House of Leaves would have been a masterpiece had it been written as a standard novel, but that doesn't mean that the form is not important, and I think it's one of the genius things about this book. But it's also messed up for obvious reasons. You get all these different basically get the two main narratives in the novel that at times overlap, and it's kind of difficult for the reader, especially at first, it was for me at least, to navigate between these two narratives. And my question for you in this case is, what did you make of the labyrinth of House of Leaves? How did you approach it? My personal experience both times was to, in order to navigate this labyrinth and to make a little bit more sense of it, it was to give more attention to the Navidson narrative in the book. Maybe at the expense of Johnny Truant's story. Especially the first time I read the book, I didn't really pay attention to it. I believe I may have skipped one or two of the paragraphs about Johnny Truant, both because his story is not quite as compelling as the Navidson record, and because the Navidson record makes so much more sense if you try to read it from the beginning to the end without all Johnny Truant's interruptions. That is, of course, a half-assed strategy, because it sacrifices so much that House of Leaves has to offer. So what was your strategy? What was your way of surviving the labyrinth? Did you have any clever way you navigated the book? Let me know in the comments below. And in general, do read the essays I link in the description box, because they're all brilliant. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and do read House of Leaves time and again, because it's one of those books that gets more and more rewarding every time you read them anew. I call them good books. Thank you once again for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.